Why do you do this? Have you guys noticed the production quality right here? I mean, you can't, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you see in Hollywood. You know, this is a major motion picture kind of production, including the poster putty to hold this steady. Yeah. That's kind of cool stuff I have. Even though I can't film this, but if you do watch it, this will be on the main screen. So you get that. And hear me in a little box of me. But that's okay. So they try to enslave American Indians first. This horrible system where they had this land and labor, then they went to African slaves. I thought about Portugal. What was it called? What were the people called who signed a contract for 7 years to become a slave? What was that little piece of land? What's it?
Little piece of land.
The little piece of land that they would get for being an entrance.
That's right.
Yeah, I heard about 5 different times. Head right, yeah. And the Middle Passage was a trip to Africa to the New World. We will come back to this. Did we get this yesterday? I don't think we did the Middle Passage, did we? So the Middle Passage. And seasoning was the first 6 months. That would be the most dangerous time because they'd be most susceptible to disease, the absolute shock of getting there, especially if they were enslaved, but also indentured servants. This is tobacco cultivation, etc. And what a horrible term, seasoning. And it's just saying that basically human beings are like, well, like another product we have, like food almost. And we're going to chew them up, which is what the sugar plantations did. Life expectancy there was less than a year. But why more and more African slaves? Why Africans? Well, we talked about American Indians, but also malaria. There were 2 strains of malaria that came over on the first, 2 strains of malaria that came on mosquitoes from the first ships from Europe to the New World. And malaria, partially because of the Portuguese, was just beginning to sweep up. It's weird to think about today, but 17 was just ravaged by malaria. It's just really weird to think about now. It's the temperature, and that's part of the reason why it didn't last all that long there. But now malaria is just going all over the Americans, all over. There are 2 strains. 2 strains. One of the strains, basically everybody will get it. It's awful. And you're sick, you can't move. It could be fatal, but the odds are you just get like your, just so ill and so sore, you can't do anything. You can't move if you get malaria. And the fun part about malaria is you recover, it can relapse and come back again multiple times. So malaria is just a horrible disease. There's another mosquito-borne illness that came at the same time called yellow fever, and that led to a horrific death. Malaria, it can kill, but it weakens, it shortens your lifespan, it's miserable. One of the 2 strains, though, people from sub-Saharan Africa were not near as susceptible. We're not exactly clear why. So I didn't tell you about this yesterday, right? Down here. We're not sure why. It has something to do with, well, have you heard of sickle cell anemia? You heard about that? There's almost completely people of sub-Saharan Africa. For whatever reason, but that same reason that people are susceptible to sickle cell anemia also gives them more immunities to that form of malaria. And that means enslaved people from sub-Saharan Africa had a better chance to get through seasoning. That's why. That's why more and more African slaves are being brought. We went through the problem, but there's a couple other reasons too. They weren't English citizens, meaning they didn't have the rights of Englishmen. Therefore, we don't have to worry about such things. It was a gray area if they had rights, just like American Indians. It was a gray area to them. Now, I'm not talking about whether or not people have rights, and they would fight for these rights. I'm talking about to the point of view of the people running the colonies. And they didn't have that contract. So you didn't have this contract sitting over their heads. So even though they would give head rights to slaves, it didn't mean they had to. That gives a huge advantage to the planter class, huge advantage. And that's why more and more African slaves are going to be brought in. And as demand went up, that's part of the reason why first the Dutch and then the British took control of that slave trade, because they could make a boatload of money, literally. And so that would lead us, you got all these kind of competing events that would lead us into one of the most important events of this time, called Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion. But one of the most important events in the history of the Americas, I would say the history of the world. And it should be easy year to remember, Bacon's Rebellion, because this is one of the most important events. You have to know this. 1676. When did the United States become an independent country? 1776. So just kind of ironically, it's exactly 100 years before. And what year did Montana become a state? Yeah, 1889. I'll tell you about how that happened too. Politics. All right, so people are moving west. Okay, remember the Legion of the Soil, we're going west, first along the river, but pretty soon more and more. They're taking land from the tribes who live there. The tribes who live there are fighting back. So along the frontier, it's really, really dangerous. Head rights. Head rights. What were the head rights? There were 50 acres of land. What land were they giving the indentured servants? What's happening to soil if you use tobacco cultivation for 3 years?
It's usually.
So they would be treated, or they would go through hell for 7 years, and then they would get one of two types of land. They'd get the used up land. By the way, how long would they last then as with used up land? Yeah. Remember the Legion of Soil? They're doomed. Or remember who's getting attacked? People on the frontier. So if the planters are moving this way, they would give the indentured servants, they'll say, hey, we're going to give you a head right, or you can take land out here. Way out in the frontier. So who's going to get attacked? Either way, they're being tricked. And can they go to anybody and complain? They have no representation in the House of Burgesses. There's nothing they can do. The Burgesses are made up of planters. Speaking of the House of Burgesses, let's look at what they did. Everybody take out your documents. And by the way, when I talk about this stuff, remember what I told you. Anything I say in class is fodder for the unit test, which is worth most of your grade. Who did I steal this from? I walked by and grabbed it and didn't bother to look. Let's look at the fornication laws. Everyone look at the fornication laws. 1661, so this is before Bacon's Rebellion. And the House of Burgesses wrote this. And so why, they had no representation? Well, let's look what no representation looked like. So let's look at the 1661 first. Everyone look at that first one. And they're going to crack down on the filthy sin of fornication. That's for the Yavama. Everyone catch that. They're saying right here it's a filthy sin. And these are people who do not want to be sinners. Let me rephrase that. They do not want people to think they're sinners. They might want to keep doing what they're doing. They just don't want people to know. Who's committing fornication that they care about by this law? Who?
Slaves.
Okay. Indentured servants or slaves on one side. Who's on the other side? Let's put it this way. Female indentured servants and slaves. And who are the men? The planters. That's what they care about. Oh, sure, they talk about fornication, but it's the masters, male, and females. Everyone got that? That's what they care about. That's the filthy sin of fornication that they're running the law. By the way, House of Burgesses. What kind of people make up the House of Burgesses? The planters, the very same people who are doing it. You get the point here. And do the slaves and servants have choice? So what are they doing? The masters are doing what to their slaves and servants? The what? They're raping the slaves. Everyone got that? That's what they're doing. They don't. They don't. This always happens in slavery. One of the, of the so many horrible things, it's just one of so many horrible things that happens with slavery. It's endemic wherever there's slavery, masters rape their slaves. Always, always. That's what happened. And they're gonna crack down on the filthy sin of fornication. Everyone got that? So let's not even worry about the first part of the law. You know, it says you have to pay 500 pounds of tobacco if they're caught fornicating. But that's not what they care about. I should have 500 pounds of tobacco. That's a lot of tobacco. And if you don't have land, how do you get tobacco? And if you're an indentured servant, can you buy it? So everyone, see where the little A in parentheses is on the third line? Does everyone see that? And the parish is dwelling, they bound to good behavior in prison. Okay, don't even worry about that. Let's get to so that first sentence, it kind of goes on to it says security to be bound with them in the next line. It's Emma finds and in the next line down. Let me read it. It's hard to read because law is hard to read. 17th century law is really hard to read. And if they or either of them committing fornication as aforesaid be servants, then their masters of such servants so offending shall pay the 500 pounds of tobacco as aforesaid to the parish aforesaid. So there's fornication. And one is a servant. I told you what was happening. Male, master, female servant. Who pays the fine? The master. And what happens to the servant? And the servant shall serve half a year time after the indenture, meaning they'll be a slave for another half a year, which is a long time. So there's fornication. The master pays both fines. The 500 pounds for being fornicator and the 500 pounds for the servant. And then the servant has to serve another half. Did everyone catch that? Or what? Everyone saw where I stopped reading. Read the next line. This is what we call a loophole. Did you catch that? What's the loophole? Say it again. If the master doesn't pay, then the servant's whipped. Seems pretty fair, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm sure we'd never be abused. And when I mean whipped, I mean, we're talking the cat of nine tails here. Do you know what the cat of nine tails is? Those who don't know, imagine a wooden handle about this big, usually wood, and then tacked to the end of the wooden tail or wooden handle are 9 whips. So every whip, it's not 1, it's 9. And 20 lashes of that to a person today would be fair, without a doubt. That'd be fair. Okay, let me phrase that for you guys. I'm from the tougher, older generation. I can handle it. But you guys, no, none of us would have a chance. They were a little tougher. But still, even then, that could be fair. So we're talking hell. And they're already going through hell. And they still have to serve the additional half a year. Wow. Gee, I wonder who wrote this law. I bet it wasn't the servants. Are we done yet? Okay, once again, one of the products of fornication could be a child. Let's look at the next thing. And if it happened, a bastard child begotten in such fornication. What a way to put it, huh? Then the woman, now where are we at here? Then the woman, if a servant in regard of the loss and trouble to her master does sustain by having a bastard. So if the woman has a child, it's so much trouble to the master. The poor master's got to go through hell because of this, right? Don't you feel sorry for him? Come on. Some of you people are looking at me like, wow, I wonder who's writing the law. For their trouble. The servant shall serve 2 years after her time of indentures expired. 2 more years. Or pay 2,000 pounds of tobacco, which of course they can't pay. So they're a slave for 2 more years if they say we have a child out of this. And besides the punishment, the additional punishment. And it says, and the reputed father to put in security to keep the child and save. The reputed father to put in security to keep the child and save the county from it. What does security mean? The father will get the child. As a what? I've been waiting for this all day. What will happen? What does it mean for security? They get to own the child. Like an indentured servant. They don't give the name, they own the child. Like this. Wow. Child, they get 2 more years of service from the servant and the child as a slave without a contract, so now it's paid. And the servant gets whipped. What a system. By the way, did the servant have any choice in any of this? So when I talk about the people on the frontier mad about no representation, that's what no representation is. Did that ever happen today where they would pass a law that only favored a tiny, narrow group of the population like that? It's unimaginable today except for everyone. That's my, yeah. We will find out about that. We'll talk about that down the road. Well, wait till I tell you about tax cuts for very wealthy people. That's this. So, who's going to say fornication was committed? Who's going to tell? Now, first thing, would the master tell? They might have a little financial advantage, we catch it, right? But remember the very first line of that law, the filthy sin of fornication. They don't want people to know that they're doing this. Would their wife tell? For the same reasons, no. I'm not saying they might have, but probably not. And you know, back then, especially up until the 1970s and 80s in the United States, it was virtually impossible for a woman to get a divorce. Much easier for her. So they're kind of stuck. So the servant, she tells what happens. She's whipped another half a year. They have a child. She's got 2 more years. 2 more years on top of her half a year. She's still whipped, and she loses the child and becomes a slave. So what's she going to do? And you can imagine her point of view. You know, she might be thinking, I got 3 more years left. So have they solved the filthy sin of fornication? Because no one complains, therefore it's not happening, right? Obviously they haven't solved it, but no one's going to say anything, so they say it's not happening. That's how you read legal system. And so you read the first words, they're going to stamp it out. Did they stamp it out? No. And that's the kind of legal system that was set up for these people on the frontier. This is just such a stark example how unfair it was. I mean, obviously, especially to women, but it was like this for everybody in some way. Pretty amazing law, isn't it? I mean, think about that. She's raped. She might have to have a child. And she's going to be whipped. And then because it's going to be, that child will be such a burden on the master, she'll have to serve 2 more years as a slave and use her child. Wow. And people thought, that's a very good law. Women, it's probably performed. I mean, let's be. You get my point here? This is incredible. But 30 years later, after being rebelled, another law called the fornication law being passed by the House of Burgesses. And now things are different. There's still indentured servants, but there's more and more slaves from Africa. On this law, look at the first one. It says, the very first law, the first paragraph, Negro women's children. Now, let me be clear what they meant by this. Negro, they use it as kind of a bastardization from Spanish, but basically anybody with darker colored skin than somebody from Maine. And how do you gauge that? You kind of make it up. And this is all just our realm, we just kind of make it. They just gonna make it. So people with darker colored skin, if they're slaves. But it's still fornication, and it's still just as unfair, but it's even more unfair and more important for the legacy of the world. Look at that first sentence. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by any Englishman upon a Negro woman. So they're not even hiding it now. Hey, we know what's happening. They're keeping their mouth shut, but what? Should be slave or free. Because it still wasn't clear in that first fornication law. How do you decide? What does it say in the next law? Line. What happens? Are they slave or free? What does it say? Get it?
The assembly chooses if they're slave.
Not quite. Even though the assembly is making the law.
All children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother.
Exactly. That's it. If the mother's a slave, they're a slave. Mother's free, they're free. Doesn't matter who the father is. Problem solved, right? Mother slave, children slave. So this is what we have to put down in your notes. Everybody write down the fornication law. Now, the first one is just a really good example of how laws are really unfair. This next one is so pernicious, it's hard to put into terms. The fornication laws is all about the mother, but more importantly, what is it created? What is it created? Slavery is now what? Say it again. Okay, I can't hear you well. Yeah, hereditary. Exactly. It's permanent and hereditary. It's permanent and hereditary. Yeah, exactly. I just didn't hear that first word. I'm sorry. And it's permanent now. It wasn't permanent before. And no place was it ever really permanent. That's not the way it was done. This is a big shift. It's permanent. And there's one more thing. Honey, isn't there now a financial incentive for the master to do what? You to rape yourselves. Why? Slaves. Did it stop it? No, just kept going. That is why today, virtually everybody in the United States, but also all over the Americas, if they're a descendant in some way of people who were enslaved in the US, they probably have ancestry that is both African and European. Almost everyone. But because of this idea that it doesn't matter who your parents are, children of slaves, all it takes is that little, one little connection, depending on where they're from, their descendants of slaves. This is what we call a big law, isn't it? Now we're going to come back to the fornication, because what happened in between the first one and the second one that led to this? Let's get back to Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion, no representation. No representation. They're furious. Nathaniel Bacon was actually a member of the elite, and he blamed the Governor William Berkeley. He was a royal governor, but there was still the House of Burgesses. Why Berkeley? He said Berkeley had rigged the system against them. Now, it's really the House of Burgesses that's ignoring them, but it's easier to blame one individual person. You know, the tyrant, the villain, who's only doing it for his personal riches. Bacon was a member of the elite, but most of the people around him were former indentured servants, former slaves who had nothing, or current slaves. And so they said, they're not protecting us from attacks. They are leaving us vulnerable, and we have no rights. They've ignored you. You have no voice in government. There's only one thing we can do: rebel and march on Jamestown. And all members of the lower class joined. We mean every walk of life. They all joined in, and they're going to become part of this. So we got the poor farmers, who might have been free and always free, never servants, but they had almost nothing. Or the former indentured servants, laborers who didn't have land, maybe lost their head right. But also this indentured servants and slaves all joined together. This is a whole group of people that might have came from all kinds of different parts of the world. Heck, there could be people who were enslaved in the Caribbean and sold there, people enslaved in Africa, indentured servants from England, and also the occasional few Dutch and Swedes mixed in there. What a crew! But here's the point. All races were there, all colors of skin. This is before the term race, as we know it, was even around. Guess where it's going to come from? Colonization. That's where race, the term comes from. So Bacon was up here. That was his actual residence. He had a couple different plots of land. He was elite, had big landhold. Way out in the frontier. It's not all that far. To give you an example where that is, let's look at the Wild West for Virginia. The Wild West. That's right. That was the Wild West. But they marched on Jamestown, this big crew. And I should add, aren't there a heck of a lot more lower class than upper class people? That's why this is a class rebellion too. And it's one of the biggest, not the biggest class rebellions in American history, where the working class people are furious about their economic situation, legal, but it's politics. Hey, governments make the rules. Governments make the laws. Governments print the currency. Governments do all of this. By the way, if you don't like politics, it's everything. It decides every single thing of our life. Everything is politics. So if you don't like it and stay out, you're just allowing the people to make those decisions and keep doing what they're doing. If you don't like it, you got to get involved. I'm just telling you. But anyways, so Jamestown sent the militia. But there's an important question I asked them. People look at that question. What class were the militia? The majority of militia on Jamestown are going to be in what class? Are they lower class too? They're going through the same issue in a different way that those on the frontier were. So what did they do? This won't be the only time in American history they joined. By the way, I put join, and I do this all the time. When I'm doing this, I'm thinking about it. I think about it in the present tense because I know I should have put join. I don't even think about it. I just think about, it happens far too often. And I always think I should change that. Then I never. So they joined the rebellion. In fact, this happened during the massive rebellions that happened in 1877 called the Great Upheaval. That was near Civil War, right after the Civil War. And that's why the National Guard's going to be created. All these things, we'll get to that. So, big rebellion. They even burnt Jamestown down. They would burn Jamestown. Most of the elite would flee. There's no royal army. There's no of the military of the army there. But the Royal Navy, they would dispatch to where the Royal Navy was, and they had ships in the Caribbean. And they sent a few frigates, which are relatively small ships, but they had anywhere from 15 to 20 large cannon. And they sailed up the James and shelled Jamestown, kind of really scared them. And then when winter hit, Bacon died. And you combine that with some dirty tricks they did, kind of like the, hey, let's have a peace conference and then arrest them sort of thing. And the Royal Navy, the rebellion died. It was so close. In fact, that's always one of the great what ifs in history. What if they would have gone 1 month? Who knows? Well, this idea of a class rebellion, those of you who know European history, there was a series of peasant rebellions, 13th, 14th century, across what is now Germany, was an unprecedented peasant rebellion. But the wealthy nobility would end up killing almost 500,000 peasants. So the point is, those on top are terrified of this. They look at this and say, oh, it's worked. Not just in Virginia, but all up and down the colonies, and they know about it in Britain because it's almost happened there. And remember, Britain just had a horrible civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. The king was beheaded, and for 10 years they were a republic and then a dictatorship. So the king was restored. This is very fresh in their minds. And that thinking was very fresh in the minds of the people when they wrote the Constitution of the US. So here's the question that the Burgesses had. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? How do we maintain our power? They don't want this to happen again. How do you do it? Most importantly, how do you make sure these lower classes can't unify? If they unify together, they're outnumbered, and maybe next time they'll win. And they look at it like, okay, Britain, they put down these rebellions, but we're isolated here in Virginia. What happens? I grab my water, put it down, grab my coffee mug, which I didn't want. Then I put that down again. Yeah. And I'll whine about this every fourth period. I'm hungry. Who's hungry? Who now really enjoys the fact that I said I'm hungry and now they want food more? Father, I don't mind you having a snack, just make sure the wrapper is tracked, you know. Because I have a snack third period always. But they're outnumbered. How do you do this? Well, they got to pass laws. And the law would be called the slave codes. They pass slave codes. Now, every place has slavery, has slave codes. There were slave codes in Virginia, but they really made strong slave codes. Some of them were literally based upon the old slave codes of the Roman Empire, going back to about 100 CE. And they only applied to slaves. This is really important. They only applied to slaves, not servants directly. Now, technically, they applied to everybody. But on the surface, it appeared like it only applied to slaves. And remember, more and more of the slaves are coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And what else? They don't have a contract. So citizens can have certain rights. But since those who don't have a contract aren't citizens and don't have rights, we can do whatever we want. And we want to make sure that all these groups that all were unified now bigger amongst themselves. So what does the slave code do? We're not going to go through every detail, but basically the restricted rights of people. And since they don't have these rights, we can play games with it. For example, they would not get a jury trial, couldn't serve on a jury. They can't assemble, which makes sense for slaveholders. You don't want your slaves to assemble and plot a slave rebellion, which was their greatest fear. They banned freedom of speech, which might encourage rebellion or people to run away. Now, they would restrict the speech of everybody, including free people, because they might encourage a rebellion. We'll get to that more down the road. Slavery represses everybody's freedom, regardless of your slave. But those who were not slaves and had a contract with indentured servants or were not ever slaves, they at least appear like they have no rights. Well, the slaves have it all taken away. There's more restrict travel. We can keep going on. And we will come back to this. But the most important of all the slave codes, you notice it's passed in 1691, the fornication law. Specifically the one about the slave, the servitude will be decided by the mother. And what did every colony do when they saw what happened in Virginia? And they saw what Virginia did. What did every colony do? They passed all these laws. Not just English colonies, British colonies. It passed on to the French, it passed on to the Spanish, it passed on to the Portuguese, and they did wherever they colonized. Wherever they colonized, they made sure these laws were in place. That's why this fornication law was so important. Bacon's law is a hinge moment. A hinge moment. Everything changed because of Bacon's rebellion. I'm not saying it wouldn't have changed anyways, but we have a specific event. Slavery changed forever. This is a little thing from the Park Service about what happened with slavery before. It's more like indentured after it would change. My guess is you could not get this anymore from the United States Forest Service today. They'll probably say slavery was a good thing. And Europeans, people of European descent, not me generic here. Clearly, when I'm talking Virginia, I mean English, mostly English or British. But here, just Europeans, they'll be free soon. Even if they're indentured servants, someday they'll be free. Someday they'll be free, and someday they will have rights. Someday, or they already have. Now, they might not have many rights, And they still don't have people in the House of Burgesses, but we have something. We're better than the other people, right? But what about people who weren't? More and more are becoming African. But there's still American Indians, like there's still slaves that were captured all over the Mediterranean, but more and more African slaves. They'll never be free. Why won't they be free? Well, we know. But think about how people forget things. And they'll never have rights. How long does it take for something like this to become, well, people forget how it happened? And just certain people have rights, certain people don't. Certain people are slaves, certain people are free. How long does it become natural? How long do people forget? Second generation is gone. I mean, there are so many things that were just normal when I was a little kid that I learned from my parents that you would have no idea. It's just little things. Just life has changed so much. And it's going to happen for you too down the road. And you go to people who are younger. Why did you know this? I know this. You know, that's about 2 generations. I'm older than you. Or 3 or 4. I don't know. I'm quite old. But yeah, I literally saw this today or yesterday. I saw this and people just did. So I can vividly remember when I was a little kid about vaccines, but I also know about when vaccines first came out, people were just overjoyed. It was just like a celebration. Oh my God, thank God there's a polio vaccine. Thank God there's smallpox vaccine. Measles, mumps, it was awful. Every kid got it. Mumps, you can see swelling. So one of the symbols was like a towel wrapped their head, they tie real tight to pull their jowls up because it would just rip out and hurt. Couldn't talk. Just miserable. And yet sometimes, especially younger people, would die. So people would go, thank God there's vaccines. Thank God. Yesterday, the state of Florida just announced they're going to ban all vaccine mandates for children. And other states are going to follow. Montana. And it's like people forgot. They forgot how bad it was before there were vaccines. Don't get me wrong, you know, vaccines aren't perfect and there's elements of that, but wow, people just forget. How long goes that? Just a couple generations. Everybody forgot. I mean, they thought smallpox was eradicated. It's coming back. Fury. Polio, they thought was eradicated. It's coming back. I know all about polio. Man I never met. My grandfather died. So it's coming back. People just forget. And you can make whatever argument about vaccine or not, but that's how generations people forget what it was like. They forgot. And pretty soon people begin to think there's always some people who are slaves and some people who weren't. And think about how this works. They have rights, they don't have rights. Must be a little better, right? There must be a hierarchy. And they're on top and they're on the bottom. Why? Well, we know it's contracts, laws, all kinds of stuff. But then, why? Hey, we forget about the laws and it just become natural. Just that's the way it is. Why are they on top? Why? Well, they kind of hinted at it in 1691. Color of skin. So it must be that the lighter colored skin, you have more rights. Lighter colored skin, if you have more rights, you must be superior. And a hierarchy by color of skin. Darker, less rights. Thus, it's always been that way, right? Dangerous slaves, because they have less rights. They're inferior. They're inferior human beings by color of skin. And who makes up this? Well, you can imagine you're going to have a whole group of people saying, sounds like a pretty good idea. Why? Because they might have lighter colored skin. Sounds like pretty good to me. And a new concept. The term race was not used until colonial era. Race, it comes from a French word. I can't remember the exact way. It was a France something, but a Ross something. But just by color, no, new concept. And it's going to be, well, I'll jump the gun then. New concept, color of skin. Now dividing everything. So for example, they just start looking for ways to give people different colors of skin. Just wait till the new science of biology in the 19th century. Then they can say, see, we have scientific proof that some people are superior. So for example, a mistranslation of a French document, which talked about makeup on French explorers saw on some people on the Mississippi River, they put down red, that became red skin for American Indians, which is the translation. And so now we got a color. Is that the color? Where did they even get the colors from? It didn't make sense. But now we have a color. Put him in the hierarchy. Put him in the hierarchy. I mean, Europeans, you know, people European descent, they think it's white, it's not white. And what came out of this? Hey, a term that would not be used to the end of the 19th century. This is where racism came from. Hey, we're talking 1690s. That very long ago. I mean, really? In all of human history, so Homo sapiens sapiens, us. Yeah. Flash, just a flash. Blink of the eye. It's not that long ago. That's where racism comes from. That's why fornication laws and this is such a big deal. And we got to get the definition of racism. So I know when I say racism, you know what it is, but it's more than simple prejudice. We got to get this definition. Please write this down. I want you to know the definition of racism. I say it, you know it, but let's be clear. And it's relatively new. And it's not natural because it was created. But if you're born into it, doesn't it seem natural? Promise after the AP exam, we will have a food day. Sound good? You can watch me eat food, maybe cookies, donuts. Pizza. So, something about them, inferior or superior. Now, don't get me wrong. If one person with a different shade of skin comes into a group of people with that, one person with a different shade of skin, they come in, there might be, there's always a fear of the unknown. I'm not saying there won't be bigotry or prejudice and it didn't exist before, but it's not the way we think about it. That's not the way it exists. And it doesn't mean just because therefore it was made up, it's not very important and also very corrosive. That's not either the point. But how did it happen? This is almost just as important. This is not people just saying, you know, I'm going to decide I'm better than somebody else. Or I guess they're right, they are better. These are not like individual decisions per se. This was done, last part, and you notice I made it in bold and italics. A cool font. Right? Uses the law, therefore politics. Economic, this was about money, remember? And cultural differences. The different groups and dividing them. Hey, won't it be hard now for the lower class to unify? If everyone's dividing themselves by race? Bacon's Rebellion, didn't matter what color, we're all upset about our lack of representation. After this, no, much more difficult. After the Civil War, it became common for the United States to use Black soldiers to put down strikes of white laborers. So they wouldn't unify, like I told you about the militia joining here. That's what they would do. Happened in Montana, using Black soldiers to put down white workers. That's part of the reason why there were 2 regiments of segregated Black soldiers in Montana because of labor violence in Montana by workers of European descent. They'd be there until there were 2 regiments in Missouri. They could get to fight out. Last 2 things for today then. Why did it happen? Okay. The House that merged it, once again, let's be clear. They're not sitting there going, you know what would be fun today? Let's create racism. Good idea, let's do it. They wanted to maintain their power. and they wanted to be on tops. And they wanted their children on. So they didn't want things to change. So if everybody's bickering amongst themselves, are they gonna change? I'm not saying necessarily that change is good or bad, that's not even the point. It just means that it's much harder to change things if everybody's bickering. They find something that's different about themselves and they fight, and therefore, nothing changes.
Good morning, Capitol High. Just one quick announcement before lunchtime here from Sodexo. They just wanted to let you know that the food vending machine is now up and running. Evidently has not been working, but it is now. So once again, the
Wow,
Sodexo food vending machine found in Bruin Hall
it's
is
yummy.
now up and running. That's it. Thank you.
Really quick. Food vending machine? I mean, like you go there and get a sandwich?
Yeah, it's like they have like salads, it's over by the.
Oh, they do?
They have salads and.
It's Oh. I didn't know that. They tried that actually for restaurants. In the 50s, they tried those and these automated places where you get a salad out of a vending machine, it didn't work. We're bringing it back. Hey, what's due on Fridays? A bride. Everybody bringing a bride. You gotta start bribing. I won't help you, it won't help you in any way, but I want a bride. Hey.
So I go back and write it.
As long as you write it, get it down, okay? Because the big thing is, I present the book gives you the background. You are responsible for that, okay? And I know we were paying attention, I wasn't worried about that. And obviously, now I'm sure.
I have a question about the fornication. So like, is it the same if it's like a white woman, like the master's wife or whatever, and then like a male slave?
Okay.
Okay.
And that, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
But that's not.
Okay.
So all the laws
Like,
apply.
wasn't like, is it the same if like the woman has a child, then it's like the master's slave? Is it the same or is it kind of?
Oh, if the, what is it, servitude? Oh, yeah, yeah, since the child will not go from, since the woman's not a slave, they would not be the slave to us.
Okay.
And if the female's free, the child will. Be.
Okay.
But that happened, the male servant would.
Yeah.
Okay, they just.
Yeah.
So it rarely ever got.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
One of another hells of its system, right?
Yeah.
But good question. See them all. What class are you in? Breathing out. Yeah. Oh. Read the book, all right.